Since I've managed to get back on my feet lately, I thought I'd try writing down a personal experience, one that seriously scared me. This might end up being kinda long, so I'll just apologize for that up front. It happened over 10 years ago, back when I was in a university. I was a student living in Tokyo. At the time, I was really into lucid dreaming. I used to try it out all the time. You probably already know what lucid dreaming is, but just in case, it's when you become aware that you're dreaming while still inside of the dream. And then you can control what happens, more or less. In my case, my lucid dreams always started whatever setting the dream initially gave me. I could act freely within that world, but only within its limits. Whenever I tried to push beyond what I already knew, like go somewhere unfamiliar, I'd suddenly wake up. For example, if the dream took place in a town I'd visited on a trip, I could walk around the familiar area, no problem. But the moment I tried to go further than I'd actually been before in real life, the dream would break and I would wake up. Also, for whatever reason, I couldn't do the flashy, fantastical stuff like flying through the sky, or shooting fried chicken out of my hands or anything weird like that. No, not in my dreams. What could I do? Was basically anything I could do in real life. That became the unspoken rule for how my lucid dreams worked. At first, it was hard to get it going. If I managed to pull it off even once a month, I was happy. But by the time I graduated, I'd trained myself enough that I could enter a lucid dream about once every 3 days or so. Back then, I just enjoyed the worlds my dreams gave me. The ones I liked the best were the dreams set at high school. I'd find the girl I used to like, ask her out, go on little dream dates, sneak a kiss here and there. They were honestly some of the best and happiest moments I can remember. But after graduation, I got hired by a mid-sized tech company doing systems designs, and my life turned into a cycle of relentless overtime. I was staying up late every night, drowning in work. It was a black company. My resentment towards the company, and specifically my boss, built up fast, and before long, my dreams started revolving around work too. Thanks to the lucid dreaming skills I'd honed during college, I started using my dreams to blow off steam. I'd punch my boss in the face, trash the office, let all that buried frustration erupt in the safety of a world I controlled. I was never afraid of mixing up dream and reality, because whenever a lucid dream began, there was always this strange falling sensation, like a sudden grip tightening around me right before sleep paralysis. It was distinct enough that I could always tell the difference. That routine went on for about a year, but the workload never got any lighter. In fact, it only got worse. I'd wake up, work till midnight, then fall into bed and spend my dreams screaming my rage into the void of my fake office. Somewhere along the way, maybe from sheer exhaustion, I started having lucid dreams every single night. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. As usual, I worked late into the night. I dragged myself home and collapsed into bed. I thought I fell asleep, but the next thing I knew, I was awake again, and it was Thursday morning. I figured I must have slept like a rock from how tired I was, and although I was annoyed at missing a dream, I was also running late, so I rushed out the door. Thursday passed, another exhausting day, and that night I was determined to get back into a lucid dream. But when I woke up again, it was Friday. 2 nights in a row without a dream? It irritated me way more than I expected, but I powered through Friday, came home, went to bed, ready to blow off steam, and yet again I woke up in the morning, Saturday, 3 days in a row without a dream. It felt wrong. I figured maybe I'd just been too tired all week, so I told myself I'd cut out early that day and really relax. I left the house determined to make the most of the weekend, but that Saturday turned out to be the worst yet. All day long, my boss kept hounding me, berating me over things I hadn't done, things I didn't even remember being assigned. By the time evening came, I was boiling with frustration. I barely held myself back. The moment the clock hit closing time, I shot out of there. I rushed home and I dove straight into bed. Sleep took me instantly. But I didn't dream. I woke up. Just another morning. I nearly lost it. It was Sunday though, so I figured I could at least try to take it easy. I lay in bed scrolling on my phone, trying to calm down, and that's when my phone rang. It was my boss.
"What the hell are you doing? Get your ass to work."
I blinked. What? It's Sunday. And then something clicked. Aha! I am dreaming. Finally. And just like that, something inside me snapped. 3 days of missed revenge fantasies had piled up. This time, I was going to go all out. I did something I never done before. I slipped a kitchen knife into my bag and I headed to the office. As soon as I walked in, my boss was already yelling. His voice echoed through the room, shrill and furious. I just stood there grinning. Let the dog bark, I thought. He got more and more agitated. I was loving it. Then, at the perfect moment, I snapped back. I shouted right back at him, and I punched him hard. Gasps rippled across the floor. All eyes were on me. The feeling? Pure release. But I wasn't finished. I went into my bag and I pulled out the knife, and I drove it into him over and over again. I shouted, "I'll kill you!" And I just kept going and going. The feeling was dull, like cutting into raw chicken. And I remember thinking, I guess it is really like chicken. And the office exploded into chaos. People ran, screamed, scattered like ants. And I stood there, waiting to wake up. But I didn't. I changed clothes and I left the building and I wandered the streets, still in the dream. And eventually my stomach growled. That's weird, I thought. I've never been hungry in a lucid dream before. Just to test it, I went to a ramen shop and ordered. I ate. Everything felt real. Too real. I started to panic. If this was a dream, then doing something impossible like going somewhere that I'd never been should snap me out of it. So I headed to the station and I bought a ticket on a train I'd almost never used, the Joban line. Even after boarding some limited express train I'd never seen before, I didn't wake up. I passed through Kashiwa, a place I'd visited before, and I kept going. No change. I eventually got off in Mito, a city I didn't know at all, and still, I didn't wake up. That's when I really realized that I might have killed someone. Actually killed someone. Maybe I'd always known, but something in me refused to admit it. Panicking, half crying, I jumped on another train and headed north. At some point I lost track of time, and I came to sitting on a worn-out 2-car train, the kind with frayed seats and cracked windows. There were only a few old folks on board. Outside was pitch black. The train stopped at a station, Izumigamori. I think that's what it was called. The conductor walked straight up to me, even though I hadn't moved. "Get off here," he said. I figured I was about to be arrested or something, so I stepped off. The platform was old, broken, lit only by a flickering streetlight. I looked back at the conductor. His face was blurred, impossible to make out. He told me, "When you leave the station, go uphill. When you see a shrine, go inside, then follow what comes next." I couldn't think anymore, or maybe I didn't want to, so I obeyed. I left the station. The town outside looked like any other rural village, but there were no lights on in any house, no sign of life, only street lamps glowing in the dark. I followed the road upward. Eventually I saw the shrine. It was quiet. Beautiful, in fact. I remember there was a perfectly clear pond in the middle, and the full moon mirrored on its surface like glass. At the center of the pond was a small shrine building, and a priest waiting in front of it. "We've been expecting you," he said, and gestured for me to sit. He handed me some foul-tasting drink and began to chant something. A sutra? I'm not sure. Time passed, the chanting continued. Eventually my body felt light, and my mind floated. The priest said, "Let yourself go. Let the feeling carry you." I did. Everything turned white. It was beautiful. And then I blacked out. And the next thing I knew, I was staring up at a ceiling I didn't recognize. My mum was there, and she was crying, saying my name. I was in hospital. Apparently I had collapsed from exhaustion on Wednesday night in my apartment. And when I didn't show up for work for 2 days, my boss came looking for me and found me. And he'd been at my bedside ever since. He'd never left. All those days I thought I had been working, the fights, the murder, the ramen, all of it had happened in a lucid dream. And Saturday, the day I thought I was being screamed at, he'd been calling my name, trying to wake me up. I cried when I realized that. Even after I recovered and went back to work, the dreams wouldn't stop. Worse, they started happening without that falling sensation, so I couldn't tell what was real anymore. And even if it was just a dream, the fact that I'd killed someone I potentially owed my life to left a scar inside of me that I couldn't heal. I couldn't really forgive myself. Even though he was as bad as he was, I wouldn't be here if he didn't act or check on me. Eventually I was diagnosed with severe depression, and I was hospitalized for a long time. I know this was long, and it probably sounds just like a bad dream or something, but here's the thing. I looked it up. Izumigamori Shrine is real. I've never been to Ibaraki in my life, but when I saw the pictures, it was exactly the place from my dream. The station, though, Izumigamori Station, does not exist. The nearest one is Omika Station, and it's a long walk away. But I want to visit there one day, but a part of me is terrified that if I do, something in my head will just snap. So for now, I'm gonna stay away. Still, if anyone from the area knows something about Izumigamori Shrine, I'd love to hear it. Sometimes I think if I hadn't followed that path at night, if I'd stayed on that train, I might not have come back. So I'm warning you, if you're thinking about trying lucid dreaming, don't. Just don't try it. Hi, Jay here. Izumigamori Shrine sounds interesting. And if you look at the screen now, here it is. I managed to track it down. Maybe one day I'll go there. Visit it in real life. This happened back when I used to work at a hotel. It was a pretty big place, located right in the middle of the city. Modern, clean, busy. The kind of place that could house over 1,000 guests on a full night. But despite all that, there was one floor that people whispered about. The kind of place where things happened. Now, I don't have any spiritual sensitivity at all. I've never seen a ghost, never believed in any of that stuff either, so I just did my job like normal. But one day, I was escorting a guest to their room. On that particular floor. We stepped out of the elevator, and before we reached the room, the guest suddenly stopped and said, "Actually, no, not this room, no, not this floor, please, can I change it?" It caught me off guard, but I nodded, and I got their room reassigned. Later the guest explained, "When I first entered the hotel, everything felt fine, but the moment I stepped out of the elevator and onto that floor, I felt this horrible sensation, and when we got to the room, I couldn't handle it anymore. I don't know how you people can work here. Like, nothing's going on." Turns out the guest had strong spiritual sensitivity. Now keep in mind this hotel was big. On a fully booked night, more than 1,000 people could be staying there. So naturally, you'd occasionally get someone falling ill or getting injured. It wasn't unheard of. But one day there was this guest who wouldn't answer their wake-up calls. We tried ringing the room several times, no response. Eventually, I went up there myself, pressed the doorbell outside their room, the intercom system, and still nothing. Then I had to use the master key to unlock the door, but the security chain was latched from the inside, so we couldn't get in. I called out several more times, but there was no reply. So we called security. They brought bolt cutters and broke the chain, and we finally got inside. The guest was lying on the bed, like they were just sleeping. But when we shook their shoulder, no reaction. They were already gone. Dead. Later on, we checked the room's records, and it was the exact same room that the spiritually sensitive guest had refused to stay in, on the supposedly haunted floor. Of course, we had to report everything to the police and walk them through what happened, and after things calmed down a bit, the general manager invited me out for lunch. During the meal, he said quietly, "Let's not talk about this with anyone else, alright?" Still shaken, I asked him, "Look, okay, I won't say anything, but is there something wrong with that room? I remember another guest once insisted on changing rooms when I brought them there." The manager leaned back in his chair, and he looked thoughtful, and then he said, "To be honest, I wasn't working here yet when it happened, so I don't know all the details myself, but apparently, not long after the hotel first opened, a guest staying in that room had some kind of breakdown and took their own life. We've had the room purified. We put up ofuda, protective charms and such, but even so, that floor still sees more sudden illnesses, more accidents than any other. We've never had anyone die in there until now, though." Turns out there had been other complaints about that floor too. It wasn't just that specific room. Plenty of guests who were booked on that floor had asked to change rooms at check-in, some before even seeing the room, and there were cases, more than a few, where a guest staying next door would call reception complaining. "The people in the next room are being so loud, can you do something?" Only there would be no one staying in the room next door. It was empty. We had heard reports like that, more than once. I only know what happens next through rumors, but apparently, the cause of the guest's death in the cursed room was never determined. They just died peacefully in bed. No wounds, no clear medical condition. They just died peacefully in bed. No wounds, no clear medical condition. It was so strange. And later, as I was getting ready to leave that job, the hotel began a renovation project, refreshing the interior floor by floor. Except that floor. They left it for last, very last. They avoided it for as long as they possibly could. That hotel isn't around anymore, so I guess the story's safe to share now. Call it closure, or maybe unfinished business. This is not a scary story, but it's something strange that comes back to me every year, without fail, when Obon rolls around. It happened about 10 years ago, during the summer, when my oldest son was 4. As usual, our family had gone back to my parents' house for the holidays. My father had died in an accident more than 10 years earlier, so the only ones living there now were my grandmother, his mother, and my mother. That summer, my son had finally reached an age where he could play on his own, as long as he had a few toys to keep him company. My family home is an old traditional house with lots of rooms, one of those big, slightly creaky places that always feel a little too quiet when no one's talking, or when night falls. My son had brought some toys with him, and he spent a lot of time playing alone in one of the unused rooms. But something felt strange that day. His behavior was unusual. He kept talking like he was speaking to someone. Sometimes he'd burst out laughing out of nowhere. And it wasn't forced laughter like he was playing some kind of game. It was natural, like how a kid laughs when they're having real fun. At dinner that evening, my wife asked him casually, "So, what were you playing today?" Without hesitation, he answered, "I was playing with Grandpa." And the room went still. Something about that answer just didn't sit right, so I asked, "Grandpa? Who do you mean exactly?" He got up without saying a word and walked straight over to the Butsuma, the room with the family altar, and pointed to a framed memorial photo of my late father. The three of us, me, my wife, and my mother, just stared at him, mouths open. My grandmother smiled gently and said, almost matter-of-factly, "It's Obon after all. He must have come back." The next day the same thing happened again. Not the whole day, but whenever my son ended up alone for a while, he'd start acting like he was playing with someone. Sometimes he'd be in his room, other times he'd be out in the garden, and we'd hear him chatting to someone unseen or pretending to spar with them, grappling, tumbling around in a game of make-believe that felt too involved for just one child's imagination. Every time we approached him, he'd stopped abruptly. He'd return to himself like waking from a dream, or sit quietly as if nothing had happened. We weren't exactly scared. No, not really. It wasn't eerie, in a horror movie way. It was just strange. It was really hard to explain. All of us felt that way, except for my grandma. She kept smiling that same serene smile. She was glad. On the fourth evening, our last night before returning home, we were having dinner when it happened. My son suddenly turned to my mother and said clearly, "He said he really liked Nagasaki." My wife and I looked at each other confused, but when I looked at my mum, her face was already changing. Her expression twisted slowly, like something long buried had been uncovered. And then tears. Big, heavy ones. She broke down crying right there at the table. "Did your grandpa say that?" she asked through the sobs, and my son, he just nodded quietly, then turned back to the TV like nothing unusual happened. My mum kept crying, not just for a minute or two, but for almost half an hour. And when she finally started to calm down, she began telling us the story behind it, something none of us had known. My parents had always loved traveling. When we were little, they'd take us on family trips every chance they got. And even after we got older and started getting caught up in school clubs and exams, they kept going, just the two of them. It was their little joy, those modest budget-friendly getaways. They didn't have a luxurious lifestyle, but they found happiness in those simple moments together on trips. That night before my father passed away, my mother had casually asked him, "Of all the places we've been, which one did you like the best?" And apparently he smiled and said, We've been to so many. They're all good in their own way. It's really hard to say." He never gave her a straight answer. The next evening, he died in an accident. Maybe my father had been holding on to that answer all these years, and when he saw his first grandson, too young to question or doubt, he finally passed along the message through him. My mother smiled through tears that night and just said, "I wonder why he just couldn't tell me himself." It was like a laugh cry, bittersweet, full of love and longing. My grandma didn't say anything, just smiled, again, like she already knew. And that was the only time that my father ever appeared to any of us. No one saw him, only my son, and even that memory faded. Later on, I tried asking my son about it again, but he couldn't give me any clear answers, and by the time he reached middle school, he didn't remember any of it. Still, every year when Obon comes around, our family, including my younger brothers, returns home. We gather in the old living room, flip through my parents' photo albums, and we remember. It's become our quiet little tradition. Now that we have lost them both. One time I asked my mum, "Come on, Mum. So what part of Nagasaki did he like the most? You gotta tell me." And she smiled softly and said, "Ha, that's a secret." I wonder what kind of memories they made. I wonder what they did on their holiday. They'd gone to Nagasaki on their honeymoon, you see. Obon is coming again this year. Maybe I'll find out the answer to Mum's secret one day. There's someone only I can see. They've been appearing ever since I was a kid, always right before someone in the family dies. And they've never changed, not once. Same figure, same clothes, same expression for decades. That's how I know it's not a person. But for convenience, I'll refer to them as the person, or simply them. The first time I saw them was before my grandmother passed away, then again before my grandfather died, even before an uncle I barely spoke to. The same thing. And it wasn't just blood relatives either. When misfortune came for someone connected to the family, even through marriage, like my cousin's wife, they would show up. Every time. They never do anything. They don't move. They don't speak. They just exist, standing there. And they look exactly like a human being. They blend in, almost too well. But there's something off, something wrong, enough that makes my brain flag them always. Maybe it's because they're always wearing the exact same outfit. Their face never changes, their posture never changes. It's like they're frozen in time. And apparently I'm the only one who can see them. If you ask me their gender, I couldn't say. They could be male, could be female. It shifts or blurs. They never do anything, they don't move, they don't speak. But the face is always blank, emotionless, expressionless, and they're always standing just barely within the edge of my vision. Never directly in front of me. Always just off to the side. I've never seen them inside a building, by the way, only outdoors. They don't announce themselves, they just slip in, quietly, when I'm distracted, when I'm zoning out. And suddenly they're there, in the corner of my eye. And like clockwork, not long after, someone dies. For a while there hadn't been any deaths in the family, I'd almost forgotten about them entirely. But then last spring, they came back. I had skipped work that day and I was standing outside a convenience store smoking. I happened to glance up, and across the street, in front of a house on the other side of the road, there they were. Same blank face, same clothes, just standing there, watching. I stared for a while, and all I could think was, someone's gonna die. Again. Then they were gone. No movement, no walking away, just gone. 3 days later, late at night, I went out again. I headed to a different convenience store to grab something, and they appeared again. This was the first time they'd ever shown up twice before a death, never back to back like that, and that's when it really got to me. This wasn't dread anymore. This was a jolt of something deeper, fear, because I'd never seen them twice like that before, and because I was distracted by their sudden appearance, I didn't notice the car. It came out of nowhere. It didn't stop, it didn't slow down. If I had been even a few inches farther out into the street, the front of the car would have hit me dead on. The front wheel of my bike scraped past the bumper. That's how close it was. It was my fault, well, partly, but the driver didn't even try to stop. No brake lights, no hesitation, no surrender. My heart was still pounding when I chased the car down a few meters to where it had stopped. I walked up to the driver's side window, half ready to yell, and then I saw them. The same person, the one who'd always been there before someone else died, now sitting in the driver's seat staring back at me through the glass. But this time the blank expression was gone. They looked angry, their face twisted into a glare of unmistakable hatred. It was the first time I'd seen them emote at all. And then they clicked their tongue and pulled away. Until that moment, I had always thought of them as a sort of passive observer, a neutral presence, maybe even a messenger. Something that arrived because death was near. Not something that caused it. But the look they gave me, that look changed everything. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a warning, it was a hunt. They hadn't been watching the deaths, they'd been causing them. And I had just slipped through their fingers. Since that night, I haven't seen them again. No more appearances, no more accidents, no one in the family has died, and I'm still here. But sometimes when I'm walking alone and the air feels just a little too quiet, I wonder, did they give up? Or are they still out there, waiting for a better chance, a cleaner strike? Maybe next time, they won't miss. I guess I'm just kind of scatterbrained. I always leave things behind. I forget my wallet or my phone, or I drop stuff like gloves or keys without noticing. Usually if I drop something while I'm walking, someone behind me will call out like, "You dropped this!" Not like it happens all the time, maybe once every 6 months or so, but still, it's a reoccurring thing. Anyway, this happened yesterday, and it is just so weird. I live in Osaka, and I was on my way home from work, transferring from the subway at Umeda to Hankyu Umeda. I was walking through that long passageway that goes past the department store, you know, the kind with those flat escalators, like the ones at the airport. I was walking alongside one of those when I heard a voice behind me say, "You dropped this." I turned around. There was this middle-aged woman in a beige-ish coat. She glanced at me briefly and then made a motion like she was picking something up off the ground and held her hand out towards me. I figured I must have dropped one of my gloves. I had them stuffed into my coat pocket. But when I looked, her hand was empty. There was absolutely nothing in it. Still, I instinctively said, "Ah, thank you," and held out both my hands in front of her, like I was catching water from a faucet. So I sort of guided her, as if to say, "You can place it here." There was no weight, no texture, no sensation at all. She handed me nothing. And then she walked off, looking weirdly pleased with herself, like she'd done a really good deed. Thing is, this was probably the 3rd time this has happened to me. The first time was back when I was in high school. I used to commute using the Osaka Loop line. And one day, I was walking through the train car towards the exit, when this office worker guy called out, "Hey, you dropped something." And I turned round, but didn't see anything on the floor. Nothing seemed missing either, when I checked my pockets. Puzzled, I followed his gaze, trying to figure out what he was talking about. But there was nothing there. I thought maybe he was just messing with me. We were pulling into a station anyway, so I ignored him, and I just ran off the train. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The second time was when I had just started working, at the station I used for my daily commute on the Hankyu line. There was a smoking area back on the platform back in those days, and while I was walking past it, this older guy standing there called out to me and said, "You just dropped something." I wasn't even walking fast, just casually making my way over to get in line. But he bent down, near his feet, like he was picking something up, and then he walked over and offered it to me. Of course, there was nothing there. I figured I'd just ran into some weirdo first thing in the morning, and I tried to ignore him, thinking, great, just my luck. But as I walked away, he put out his cigarette and started following me. Hey, you sure this isn't yours? He kept asking over and over. He wouldn't let it go. Finally, I snapped at him and I said, I don't know what it is. And he gave me this genuinely troubled look, then turned and left. I remember thinking maybe this guy had some kind of issue, but his voice was steady and the way he spoke was totally normal. What really stuck with me was how sincerely confused and sorry he looked. It didn't feel like someone putting on an act. And now, this was the third time. I'm honestly starting to wonder, am I the one who's not right in the head? Or is it the people picking things up for me who are seeing something that I can't? Are they the strange ones? What exactly am I dropping? The only common thread is that it always happens around train stations. This third time, though, it's starting to get under my skin. It felt wrong, unsettling in a way I just can't explain. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? Does anyone know what this could be? Hi, Jay here. I might know what this could be. This story really reminded me of the second video I ever made, which was about 5 or 6 years ago. I'll now read the story, Did You Drop This? And I wonder if you'll see what I'm driving at. Well, I guess you all will by the end. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are of what the protagonists have dropped. It was early morning. I was waiting for my usual train to arrive. I was heading to the office. The train pulled in, and everyone got in line to board. Someone behind tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around to see a strange-looking person. He was smiling at me. It was an odd, sympathetic smile. The reason I thought he was strange was because he wasn't wearing anything modern. He wore a silk hat and really out-of-date clothes. I guessed he was between 40 and 50 years old. I just thought, okay, this guy's a bit weird. I wonder what he wants. It was like a movie because I thought to myself, can someone like this be in real life? I thought, just my luck, I get to speak to a weirdo early in the morning. So I asked, can I help you with something? And he said, well, I saw something on the floor and I thought you dropped it. He said as he offered out a closed fist towards me. Huh? Did I drop something, I thought? Oh, thank you, sorry about that, I said, and I placed my hand under his closed fist. He looked me in the eyes and said, don't drop it again, as he opened his fist. Oh, what? Excuse me? I began. I had no idea what he was talking about. I looked down to see what he was about to place into my hands, trying to work out what I dropped. But my hand was completely empty. He hadn't put anything into my hand. I had no idea what he meant. I couldn't understand the situation at all. Oh, was all I managed to say. I met his gaze one last time, held it for no longer than a second before he disappeared into a crowd of commuters. He was gone. There was just a slim, middle-aged man reading the newspaper staring at me. Was that a ghost? I asked myself. I felt like I was under some kind of spell. I didn't feel like my usual self at all. What the hell was that? I tried to get my head straight and look forward, but suddenly I felt pain. My head began to throb. I wonder if it could be even described as a headache because it felt like my head was about to crack in two. I felt nauseous, and I had to get out of line immediately before I threw up everywhere. I managed to make it back to the toilets in time. I have no idea why I became suddenly sick. I just sat in the cubicle by myself until I started to feel a little better. I glanced at my watch and realized that an hour had passed. Oh man, I'm going to be in so much trouble when I get to work, I thought. I slowly left my cubicle and tried to make it back to the tracks. The atmosphere seemed different, almost solemn. Did something happen out there? I wanted to find out, so I went to ask an employee at the station. He told me that there had been an accident on the tracks. I guess someone had been hit by a train? I was wrong. A much more fatal accident had happened. The Amagasaki rail crash. A disastrous railway derailment. The train I was about to board was destined to derail. But I was supposed to be on that train. I was so lucky that I didn't get on. Sometimes I think about what that person tried to hand me. And I wonder, could it have been my own life? I'll never know. It's just an idea. I also wonder why I was saved. I'm just a member of the public. There's nothing special about me. This isn't something I tell people often, but once the cold weather rolls around, I always end up thinking about it again. Back when I was in high school, I worked part-time at McDonald's inside the train station. It was your typical shift, nothing out of the ordinary. I was behind the counter, half zoning out while keeping one eye on the clock, when something odd clicked in my brain. No orders had come in over 30 minutes. I blinked at the screen, double-checked the register, and glanced around the seating area. Nothing. Not a single customer. It was strange. Really strange, because this was a station McDonald's. You'd expect waves of people all day. Commuters grabbing something before the train, students hanging around, office workers killing time. Even during the slowest hours, you'd never go more than a few minutes before someone walked in. But here we were, a full 30 minutes of absolute nothing. I looked over at the manager standing by the register and said, casually, "Kinda weird how no one's come in, right?" The manager looked up, brows furrowed, then turned to glance out the front windows towards the concourse. "You know what, that is strange," he said. "This place is never empty." He sounded uneasy, not scared exactly, but thrown off like something didn't add up. Without another word, he stepped out from behind the counter and walked outside the door to check what was going on outside. I stayed behind, hands resting on the stainless steel counter, staring absent-mindedly at the glowing screen in front of me. A few minutes passed, maybe more, and that's when I realized that the station outside the window was also completely empty. There was not a single person in sight. I stepped closer to the glass, pressing my forehead near the edge of the frame, like that would somehow give me a better view. I scanned the entire concourse, the platforms, the ticket gates, the stairs. No one at all was there. And this wasn't some rural countryside station either. It was a busy stop, a commuter hub, and it was around 5 p.m., right in the middle of the evening rush, the time where everything usually floods with people heading home. Trains arriving and departing in quick bursts, but outside it was like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly above me. The ice machine clicked to life in the background, but still, no customers, no rush of footfall, not even the sound of a train. And that's when unease shifted into something a little heavier, like a kind of static had settled on my skin. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a photograph. The silence was too clean, too hollow. Something wasn't right. Had something happened? Something big? I opened the side door and stepped out, heart suddenly racing. Just then the manager came walking back from around the corner. I didn't even let him speak. I asked almost breathlessly, "Where is everyone? Why is it empty out here?" He looked at me like I'd said something completely nonsensical, tilted his head a little, furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about?" he said. We've got inventory to restock. Go grab the frozen trays from the back. Come on. It's like nothing had happened. Like it was a normal evening. I stood there stunned. But he'd looked out the window too, hadn't he, right before he stepped outside? I glanced back through the glass. The concourse outside was full. Just like always, office workers in suits, students with backpacks, shoppers pulling suitcases, the steady hum of a normal busy station evening. I stared at them for a while, trying to process what I was seeing. That wasn't what it had looked like a few minutes ago. I knew it. There hadn't been anyone there, no movement, no people, just fluorescent lights and empty platforms stretching out into nowhere. And yet now everything was back. The world had snapped back into place like nothing had happened. I tried to bring it up again, to ask if he remembered what we'd seen, but the manager gave no indication that he'd noticed anything unusual. Not a flicker of recognition. He just went about his work like he'd never walked outside at all, and we'd never had that short conversation. I still really don't know what to make of it. Sometimes I wonder, was it just me? Did I hallucinate the whole thing? But the timing, the manager's reaction, that shared moment of noticing something was off. I don't know. I really don't think I hallucinated it. Even if he doesn't remember it now, I swear he saw it too. We both saw it. The empty station, the paused world, like a photograph. And then it was all gone. Gonna sound completely insane, but I need to talk about it. I remember it clearly. 2 or 3 times a month, without warning, my mum would become a clown. She was completely normal at breakfast, same as always, calm, smiling, soft-spoken. But when I finished eating and waited outside like I usually did, sometimes she'd step out of the house dressed like a clown. Not in costume, no, her clothes and hairstyle were the same as ever, but her face would be painted white, with stars and diamond shapes drawn on her cheeks, and it was horrifying, because I've always hated clowns. Even as a toddler, I couldn't stand them. Just seeing a clown mascot on a sign at a restaurant or spotting one in a theme park would send me into a screaming fit, and yet my mum, that familiar figure, would walk out looking like that, face painted like something from a circus, and act completely normal, as if nothing had changed. She spoke the same way, held the same posture. She was acting like she wasn't in full clown makeup. I didn't say a thing. Even as a child, I had this instinctive feeling that asking her about the makeup would lead to something bad, really bad. So I never brought it up. Whenever she was in that state, I just kept quiet. I avoided looking at her face. On the way to daycare, I'd keep my head down the entire time, staring at the ground, following behind her quietly. And before I knew it, we'd arrive at the daycare entrance. I never figured out why she became a clown on those mornings. There didn't seem to be any particular trigger, no pattern, no clue. It just happened. And I remember dreading it. I started to hate her because of it. And it sounds horrible to say that, but I couldn't understand why she was doing it. And it made me feel sick inside. And this unease stuck with me for years. But then, as I got older, the clown appearances started happening less and less. And by the time I was in my final year of daycare, they stopped completely. I never saw that clown face again. Just the other day, now that I'm 21, I finally mentioned it quietly to my dad. I didn't go into detail, just brought up how back then sometimes Mom used to take me to daycare dressed like a clown. He laughed in my face and said, "What are you talking about? I was the one who took you to daycare back then. I wasn't working." That stopped me cold. According to him, during the years that I was in daycare, he was unemployed and handling all the drop-offs and pickups. Mum, on the other hand, worked full-time every day from morning to night as a temporary worker. She was gone by the time we got up and never home for breakfast. We never had breakfast together. Not once, he said. But I remember it. I remember sitting at the table eating while she moved around the kitchen. I remember her stepping out of the front door. I remember her face so clearly. I'm sure I'm not misremembering. At least I don't think I am. I haven't asked my mum about this. Not yet. No, I don't want to ask yet.